Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Light Gate. On this beautiful Monday night, we are in early pre-record for a reason. Our very awesome guest is in England, and it's easier to do this a little bit earlier. It will be shown tomorrow, our time. We love you very much. We're coming to you from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We are on Facebook, we're on Roku, we are on Rumble, and we are on YouTube. I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsors for our network. We love you, Carnation. You're here with us always, and we appreciate it. Use it in my own home as well. And let's go. Okay, Preston, I hand it to you.
Thank you, Dolly, and thank you everyone for joining us for episode number 111 of the Light Gate, 111. It's kind of an auspicious number. Pretty excited about it. We've been going strong for quite a long time and just doing better and better. So yeah, thanks for joining us. I, of course, am your host, Preston Dennett, and my lovely co-host is, of course, as you know, Dolly Safran. She's a contactee. I have the research side of it. She's got the first-hand experience side of it. And we kind of both blend to both of those sides. So yeah, we're having a lot of fun with this. Thank you so much for joining us. It's because of you guys we do this show. Wish I could do it live this time, but yeah, this is a pre-record, which has its own benefits, I think, because we get to join you in chat, and we certainly will be. But I know some of you are probably watching, so I'll just give a quick shout out for some of you guys, like probably Peak. Hi, Peak, Louise. I know Amanita, you're in the UK, but you always check us out. Who else? Bob, namaste. We love you so much.
Michael Kennedy.
Good one. Heidi Hansen, she sometimes pops in. Oh.
Michael, yes.
Hello to all of you guys.
Yeah.
Cherise, you may be watching us. I'm being a little bit presumptuous here. I hope you don't mind, but we love you guys. So thanks for tuning in. And yeah, we'll be in chat to interact, which is always so much fun. But I'm just going to get directly to our guest today. Super excited. I've been following his research for a very, very long time. I've got a few of his books as well. I really respect him. He's an excellent researcher. And his name, of course, is Philip Mantle. He's a UK-based researcher who has been in this field for a pretty long time. I'm approaching 40 years, but he exceeds me. So, I mean, it's such an honor. Let me tell you just a little bit about him. You've probably heard of him, but if you haven't, I'm surprised. But I'm going to tell you a little bit. He's a pioneering research, certainly. A lecturer and broadcaster with more than 40 years of experience in this field. He was formerly the Director of Investigations for the British UFO Research Association, BUFORA, very famous, and was the MUFON Representative for England. He has written many articles and features for numerous publications around the world and has been both editor and assistant editor of the High Street UFO publications. He's the founder of Flying Disc Press. He's doing very important work there, allowing people to get their stories told. He's, of course, written many books on the subject, including, but not limited to, Pascagoula Uncovered, UK Landings, gosh, I think that's the title of it, and many others. But his books have been published in 6 different languages around the world, and probably going to be more soon, I would suspect. We do have some of his links in the show notes, so check it out. Check out Flying Disc Press, publishing all kinds of really wonderful books, and it's just a true honor to have him on our show. So I am going to bring him into the room. Hi, Philip.
Yeah, good evening, Dolly. Good evening, Preston. A great honor to
the USA for a couple hours.
Yeah, and congratulations, of course, with the broadcast. People don't realize, how much work goes into these things. So being this your 111th issue, well done. Congratulations. I'm glad it's not your 666, because it was 666. So we'll stick with 111, I think.
No, that's a good one.
I don't know who we'll bring on for that show, but it should be that would be interesting. Might just have to skip that one. Yeah, I'm so excited. I mean, I am in particular because read your books before I was even involved in this field, I think. But yeah, you've been doing such important work for so very long. So thank you for that. Not many people who've stuck it through to, for that many years. Researchers kind of come and go. I've watched that happen. So yeah, that's amazing.
Yes, it's been a long time. I mean, I remember thinking to myself when I reached 60, and I thought, I've been doing this for 40 years. That's 2/3 of my life, And of course, I'm a bit older than that now. So yes, it's been a long time.
Yeah, well, it's an endlessly fascinating subject, as you know. Just when you think you've figured things out, along comes something new, and you're like, huh, well, that's different. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. You're spot on there, Preston. You think you know it all, or you may have gone down a route that's given you some answers, and then hey presto, there's something just knocks it into touch again, and you start from scratch.
Such is the way of the universe, I guess. Okay, well, as I warned you in the green room, as we call it, I do like to start each show by asking our guests what they were like as little kids. Did they believe in this subject? Have they personally had any experiences? Have you seen a UFO? What brought you to this path of doing UFO research and where you are today?
I
Which
mean,
is a long journey.
Yeah, it is. It's a long journey. I mean, I grew up in a normal family background. My father passed away when I was 2 years old, but my mother remarried.
Oh.
So my stepfather, I call him my father, we were typically working class. He worked down the coal mines all his life after serving in the war. I've got brothers and sisters. Sadly, my brother's no longer with us. My parents are gone. But the one thing we always had in the house, my mum she wasn't an academic by any stretch of the imagination, but she loved to read. So we always had books, right until the day she died, guys. She still loved to read a book. Not
Nice.
So much factual, but she liked her novels and things of that nature. So I was always encouraged to read. And certainly during my teenage years, I was interested in a small handful of things. One was the space program, because I was 11 when the men landed on the moon.
Oh, wow.
I loved astronomy in general, and my other interest was the paranormal. And I would read what I could about it, which wasn't a lot in those days. And occasionally you may see something on the TV about it. But I was fortunate because where we lived, literally the other side of the street, my best friend's grandmother lived there, and she used to go to a local spiritualist church. So I used to, now and again, I would accompany her. I found it fascinating, even if I didn't sort of believe what they believed. It was great to see it and how it operated and how it worked. And then I remember reading one book on astronomy, and it had one chapter about UFOs. I can't remember the name of the book. I've no idea what it was. And it basically dismissed them, which I found rather curious because there were other chapters in this book that were, literally very speculative about what the universe may look like. And of course, all these years later, they got it wrong, But nonetheless, it sparked my interest. And when I left high school when I was 16 years of age, started work, worked in various places. And then in the winter of 1978 over into 1979, a friend and I went to work in West Germany. And I couldn't speak a word of German, not a word. So you were a bit stuck what you were able to do on an evening, because if you sat in front of a television, unless it was a football match, you'd no idea what was going on, So I phoned my mum and said, can you send me some books to read, Mum? I'm not bothered what they are. So, a week later, a box arrives, and somehow my mum had got me a box of paperbacks all about UFOs. I think she bought them on a local market.
Wow.
So I sat there on an evening, reading these things. So when I returned home in 1979, I'd got a bit more knowledge than I had previously. And I live in a county called West Yorkshire. The largest city is a city called Leeds. And I lived, about 5 miles from the city of Leeds. And it did then and still does. It publishes an evening newspaper called the Yorkshire Evening Post. And my aunt came round. She only lived round the corner from us. She came round one night with a copy of this newspaper, and she pointed out this advertisement. And it said, coming up this Sunday, the first meeting of the Yorkshire UFO Society in Leeds. So I didn't drive at this point. So in those days, I don't know about the States, but in those days here in the UK, the whole place used to close on a Sunday. But I still managed to get a bus into Leeds. I found this place, the location, and I wandered in, and I could hear some noise coming from one of the rooms. And there were about 20 or 30 people there. And the Yorkshire UFO Society was begun by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall.
Right.
They put on a presentation. They'd obviously been involved in this for a few years. My eyes lit up when I saw a table of books, because they were hard to come by, and there were books I could buy. So I did, and I paid my membership, which I think was about £2 for the whole year, about $3 for the whole year. And we would have monthly meetings, and I would go there and sit there, and I just felt like I'd found my place in life. And I was never satisfied. I wanted to know more. And we were quite fortunate as we moved into the 1980s. The county I live in is one of 4 Yorkshire counties. It used to be one, and it was split up into north, south, east, and west. And in North Yorkshire, there is a national park called the Yorkshire Dales, beautiful part of the world. And for some reason, certain locations in the Yorkshire Dales National Park, in and around the town of Skipton, we were getting a lot of sightings reported to us. I mean, a bit of everything, literally. We were fortunate that one of our members lived in the area, and he was a police sergeant. And he witnessed the phenomena himself. So, we tried our damnedest to confront the phenomena face to face in these locations. Never quite managed it. But the next best thing, of course, is to speak to those that have. If I can't see it myself and feel it and, get hold of it, then speak to others that have. And that's how it began for me, Preston, And we were very active, and we made ourselves very visible. We would, wherever we went, we'd leave flyers and notices and business cards. And one of the things we used to do when people contacted us was ask them, how did you find out about us? Where did you get our phone number or our address, And that's how it all began. And I never looked back. I felt like I was at home. And I've been at it ever since.
So interesting. Now, when your mom sent you this box of books, back then there weren't a whole lot of books. I could only find maybe 5 or 10. I'm wondering, do you remember any of the books they were?
I don't remember any because I didn't bring them home with me because we were only allowed so much luggage.
Right.
And
right.
But I know they cemented my kindling interest. And of course, in 1979, when I came home here in the UK, we also had the movie Close Encounters come out.
Right.
And I went to watch that, and that again reinforced my interest. And
I have a question.
It was just amazing. But many years later, here in the UK, they brought out a different version on video of the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Really?
I don't know if it was remastered or whatever. And they
cut. They added some time to it. They showed the inside of the craft.
Yeah, but what was curious was I was actually hired to help promote it here in the UK.
Oh, wow.
That's
So
amazing.
if you'd have told me that when I was sat in that cinema back in 1979 watching that in 10 or 15 years time, Philip, you're going to be hired to promote this film, I would have thought you were absolutely nuts.
That's awesome.
Just one of the curious things that's happened. Sorry, Dolly, you were going to ask something.
I have a burning question, because in my mind, I want to know how you thought about everything then, because people don't just automatically believe something for no reason, and that there's a point where you realize that you understand that this is real, and then you tip over into the actual knowing of it being real. So back in those days, those early days for you, what was your opinion in your own mind of what you were reading?
Before I joined the Yorkshire UFO Society, I was wide-eyed and gormless, as I've often said. I don't know if you use that phrase in the States, gormless.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And but when I started to speak to these people with my colleagues Mark and Graham in these locations, they were everyday people, even though it was like a semi-rural setting we were in. One was a farmer, one ran a cattery, and I thought, but what really did it? We could read about encounters around the world, and they were fabulous. Mm-hmm. And out of the blue, after I'd done a little newspaper article, I lived near the city as well, one called Wakefield, which is not far from Leeds. And I did an article for them. And a lady phoned me and she said, "Philip, you won't believe me, you won't believe me, you won't believe me." I said, "Well, give us a chance." Those were her opening words. And like I said, my father was a coal miner all his life. I grew up in a mining community. My father's friends were coal miners, and I had friends down the mines as well. And this lady was the wife of a coal miner. All this area was coal mines. It's all gone now. And she lived just a few miles away near a small town called Normanton. So myself and my colleague, Mark Bursell, went to speak to her. We arranged it. And what she told us, she said, the children were outside one day playing, and they were playing a particular ball game that's one that's made up around here. It's, you won't find it played in many places. It's something that's local to here. I remember playing it when I was a child. And she said it was just after lunch. She was literally washing the dishes after lunch. One of the children ran in and said, Mum, there's an aeroplane crashed in the field. Huh. Now, where she lived was a little row of houses with a cul-de-sac at the end, and there were some fields and some electricity pylons. She says, I went outside and looked over the fields, and she says there was this thing on the ground. But she said it was shaped like a Mexican hat, but it was silvery in colour. So she got the children, who had a couple of friends with them as well, made their way towards this thing, and they went down a little dip, and so they lost sight of it. When they come up the other side, there was a fence, and she says, now there's 3 tall men, all covered in white, waving something over the field. The children wanted to climb over this fence, but she held them back. At this point, these 3 men walked to the rear of this thing. It rolled silently into the air, stopped, and shot off at a distance. And she thought, well, I can't repeat what she may have thought, but she thought, oh boy. So she said, I was sure it was going to be on the local news that evening, local TV news. She sat down and watched it, nothing. Okay, surely it must be in the newspaper. There was a local newspaper in that area, which is still going. Not a thing. She even asked some of her neighbors, and they just kind of looked at her, and she was as puzzled as much by that, I think, and what she saw, because this was a lovely sunny day. Normanton is a busy little place. There's a major motorway called the M62, goes right past it, tens of thousands of cars.
What year was that?
This was 1980.
Okay. Wow.
It was a beautiful sunny day, so people will be out and about like her children were playing outside. We spoke to the children as well. They never called them spacemen or aliens. They just said these men and this thing. So what he did, I mean, again, these, I know it's not scientific, but these were the kind of people I'd grown up with all my life. You know, Mrs. Westerman was her name. Her husband worked down the local coal mine.
Right.
You know, it was a coal mining area. Sadly, they're all gone now. So she wouldn't even allow us to take a photograph. And she certainly didn't want us using her name anywhere. So we promised.
Understandable.
And so I didn't need any more convincing. You know, this wasn't just lights in the sky. This was something tangible, reported and witnessed and observed by the type of people I'd grown up with all my life. What is fascinating is obviously these children have grown up. And I think it was about 3 years ago, I'd done a podcast with someone. And a lady from New Zealand sent me an email. She says, I listened to you last night on whatever. You mentioned this incident in Normanton, but you didn't give the family's name. I just forgot to use the name, you know, Mrs. Westerman. She said, I used to live in Normanton. What was their name? So I says, it's Westerman. She says, my best friend was called Westerman.
Oh my God. Wow.
And her best friend was actually one of those children that had since grown up. And she was able to put me in touch with her, and I communicated with her, and she confirmed everything. A couple of years later, I got an email from a gentleman, said, I saw you on TV the other night, Philip, and I looked you up. You were also involved in a thing at Normanton. He says, my partner was one of those children. She was one of the children's friends that was there at the time. So
amazing. Wow.
I got a phone number. I spoke to her. And again, she confirmed it all once again. And I said, I'll come and interview you. But I didn't know. I thought she was still local. She wasn't. She lived in Cornwall, which is about as far away you can get from here. It's, you know, once you head past Cornwall, the next stop is the United States at the other side of the Atlantic, you know. So, but I spoke to her on the phone. So even after all these years, it was not that I needed it. It was lovely to have that confirmation yet again from these two children that had now grown up. And, you know, I didn't need any convincing whatsoever. None at all.
I'm curious, what did the people look like who were outside the craft? I know you said they were tall, but did they see any more than that? No,
what they described them as just tall men. They had something like a visor over their face. They were like a one-piece boiler suit, as we call them. I think you call them a coverall, but we call them boiler suits. All white. They were that close they could see that they didn't have fingers. They had mittens. So there were no fingers. And then their shoes or their boots, they said, had big wedges on them. And they only had something small in their hand, and they seemed to be waving it over the ground. And you know, now that dip and the fence is gone. You know, the area has been farmed, but the pylons are still there. The house is still there, and the pylons used to go to a place nearby here, a power station, which has since been closed down. It's still there, but it's closed. And you know, there was nothing on the ground. There was, you know, and she was perplexed by this. There was Mrs. Westerman. You could see that look on her face. Yes, what she observed really puzzled her. Wow. But what equally puzzled her was, why the hell wasn't there somebody else coming forward? She said they must have seen it. And I've often wondered if you have to be in there at the time and the place to encounter these things, and almost as if you're outside of it, you know, I don't know, but she was.
Well, a lot of people don't talk about it. You know, it's very possible that others saw it and they're just too embarrassed or afraid of ridicule.
Could well be. I mean, we've run the story in the local newspaper here a couple of times down the years. Right. You mentioned my book, Preston, UFO Landings UK.
Yeah.
That account that I've just talked about in Normanton is in that book. And one of the things we tried to do is say, you know, if you were a witness to these things back in 1980, please come forward in confidence, etc. So far, that hasn't happened. But I'm not bothered. I don't need any confirmation. It would just be nice, but there you go.
Well, so I don't suppose they checked to see if there was any landing traces, or you said there wasn't anything?
I asked them, I said, do you see anything in the field? And it was just grass at the time. It's now ploughed, or it was the last time I looked a couple of years back. So it's been reclaimed by, farmland now. And the dip that was there has been filled in, and the fence is no longer there because, it was a barrier to whatever they were farming in that area. But it didn't make any noise. There are no, this is 1980, there were no helicopters around here. Our police force didn't even have a helicopter. They had to hire one from somewhere else, from another force. We didn't have an air ambulance here in this area. So there was no helicopter. Of course, a helicopter makes a hell of a noise. The whole street would have heard it even if they didn't see it. And of course, there was nothing, not a thing.
Is there anything about that area?
Did you get them to draw a picture of it?
Well, we were fortunate because I was with my colleague, Mark Birdsall. And Mark was a very talented artist in his own right. So as the children and Mrs. Westerman were talking, he's scribbling away. And I'm thinking he's taking notes because I was. And we had a tape recorder as well, of course. And then when everything had finished, Mark said, "Did it look like that?" I went, "Oh boy, yes, it did." They altered a small, made some little adjustments to it. But they said, "Oh, yes, it did." And part of the Yorkshire UFO Society at that time, we used to print our own little magazine. We print it by hand. We do about 40 copies. And we ran it in that. So we still have the original drawings in that magazine, which I've reproduced in the book, of course.
Oh, good.
So, so that just, I was up and running, but that set me on a sprint then. I didn't need any more confirmation because this wasn't Roswell, New Mexico, out in the desert. This was little sleepy town, Normanton, coal mining area. And there you go.
Yeah. Well, people obviously don't want publicity. That I think argues for the credibility of a case. They're not looking for money or attention.
Not at all. We weren't allowed to mention her name. I had a camera with me. No photographs. So we had no photographs of any of them. I said, fair enough. It's not a problem. Yeah. We just liked photographs for our records. That's all. And she certainly didn't want any publicity or money. Well, we didn't have any money anyway, so it didn't make any difference. Make of it what you will.
I'm curious, whenever there's a landing, I'm like, why this area? I know there's mines in that area. That could be a factor here, but I'm wondering, is there a military base? Is there anything unusual?
No, this is just a little sleepy place. I still live in the area. I live in a small town now called Pontefract. Normanton is the next town down from us. And there's nothing. Even the coal mines have all gone now. They started in the mid-80s to be closed down. So there was nothing special about the area. There's nothing military. There's no air bases. We have an airport in Leeds, but it's only a small commercial airport, a regional airport. There's nothing. Coal mines was it, and they've all gone.
Amazing. So, now that we're on the subject of, landings in this book, how many did you cover in this book? How many landing cases?
I can't remember, but there's a good few. But what it did start me off, Preston, was an interest in the sort of high strangeness cases. I remember reading about high strangeness and the idea that the higher the high strangeness, if that makes sense, the more likely the account that they're telling you would remain unidentified. We all know that most sightings can be explained. We all encounter that, but the high strangeness factors tend to rule out conventional explanations, or certainly something obvious anyway. And this is what started it for me, was UFO landings UK, was the case in Normanton. So I would file them. Originally, it was paper files. I still have an old filing cabinet next to me here. And then in later years, of course, it's digital store. And I ended up with all these cases, some of which I must admit, Preston, are very bizarre. They are very bizarre indeed, but I thought I will publish them and people can make up their own minds then. And that's what happened with the book UFO Landings UK. And it's all the cases that I'd accumulated down the years, some of which I'd been involved with myself, most of which were I'd acquired from elsewhere, from other colleagues and things of that nature.
Right. Well, I think it's important to publish the high strangeness aspects, because censoring out data out of, an experience is certainly not going to solve any mysteries. And other people are clearly experiencing these same things, but are reluctant to talk about it. What I've discovered is the more strange it is, the more reluctant people are to come forward and talk about it.
Yeah, and I think that account is more reliable as well.
Exactly.
That's what I found, and that's just my. I mean, there's one case in Wales. A young boy is on the beach with his father. Can't remember the year. It's 70s, and there's some rocks by the beach, and he says, "Dad, can I go up the rocks?" Yeah, of course. This is not a huge mountain. It's just on next to the beach. So this young boy, I think he's about 8 or 10 years of age, he crawls up the rocks. And hey presto, there is a thing on the rocks with the dome on top, and there is the most. He bobs down and hides behind a rock, and he can see his father, and he's shouting his father to come up, and his father's thinking, "Oh, what does he want now? What is it? An ice cream he wants, or what? Oh, forget it." So when he sticks his head back up, this thing is still there, but the creature that's in it looks like it's made of jelly. It's the strangest thing. It's very difficult to describe. And of course, he runs down and tells his father, and when he goes back with him, it's gone. And it's so bizarre. You ponder, well, should I put this in the book or not? Because it is really bizarre. But no, publish it. Because it's been published in a magazine before, and allow people to make their own judgment. I'm not out to indoctrinate anybody and tell people what's what. They make up their own mind. And it's a very strange encounter, but there you go.
Yeah. Do you find a lot of these landings do involve humanoids?
Yes. I think what we have in the UK, because we're a multicultural country, and we have a bit of everything, if I'm honest. Yes, there are a lot of humanoids, but there's a whole smattering of things. We've had cryptids involved as well on occasion. There's one with almost like a mothman, like the British mothman, right? But like more like the wings of a bat than a moth. That was involved in a landing case as well. So you just scratch your head, but it all began, my interest in that aspect of the phenomena with the case in Normanton. I was able to speak to them myself, and it's literally in my own backyard.
Amazing. Yeah. So what would be your favorite case a favorite early case other than the Normanton one?
That's a good question. One of the areas that we got a lot of sightings from was around the market town of Skipton in the Yorkshire Dales National Park. Just outside of Skipton was a small village called Carlton. And above Carlton was Carlton Moor. Simple as that. You drive through the village, you go past the Swan Pub, past the shop, up the other side, up an incline, and you come over the cattle grid at the top, and there was the moor in front of you. And it was mainly growing heather on it because there was no sheep. It was game birds that they used to have in the area. So come August, they blow them to bits, of course, and sell the pheasants and what have you, and the partridge in the local restaurants. And the moor laid out in front of you, you could see it for a long way. There was no buildings on it or anything like that. And at the other side, it sloped away, and you could see it slope away down towards Skipton. And there was a gentleman who contacted us who lived at the far end of the moor, and he did run a cattery. So that was his business. You're going on holiday for a couple of weeks. Who's going to look after your pet cat? We'll take it to him. And he said he used to have a routine every night before he, went to bed. And his house was perched on the moor spread out behind him. And he said, I'd walk out, check the locks or whatever. He said, when I turn around to face the house, there are these 5, he called them almost pie dish things in the sky above his house. And I'm not talking little dots in the distance. I'm talking like that.
Wow.
It was like 5 moons, but they were all orange and they were all doing aerial acrobatics. And he said,
Wow.
I just stood there in amazement because he'd lived there in this area all his life, never seen anything like that, didn't know anything about it. And we only found out about it because he reported it to the local police. And of course, one of our colleagues was a police sergeant and he got to know about it and we were able to speak to him. Again, didn't want any publicity, anything like that. So we got a lot of sightings in this area. And one thing stuck to me. What we did one year is we put a caravan on the top of the moor and we manned it 24 hours for 7 days a week. 7 days for that week. We put signposts on either side of the moor. We did some local publicity. And on average, we got about a dozen people a day stop by and report things to us. One of the most curious ones, I'm not saying it's my favorite, but it's one of the most curious ones. We had what we call, people of my age now. I'm 67. They were about the same age as me, but they'd retired. And at this point in time where they lived, there was no major supermarket built, but there was one a few miles away. So every fortnight, not every week, every 2 weeks, they would make this journey about the same time, same day to the supermarket, come back. They're driving back one night, it's dark, and they said there's this factory in the setback in one of the fields, and it's shaped like that. It's got all these windows in it, and all the windows are blazing light coming out. I'm thinking, oh, this factory's in full production, whatever it's making. Of course, 2 weeks later, they go back. Guess what? There is no factory there.
What year was that?
Pardon?
What year was that?
I think this was 1983.
Wow.
So there's nothing there.
So bizarre.
And when they were in the caravan talking to us about this, we had maps of the area, and they showed us the route on the map that they took. So in daylight, my colleague and I drove that route, and again, there is nothing, not a thing. I mean, it's not an area of industry anyway. There is no industry, or there wasn't. I don't know about now, but it's unlikely. This is a national park we're talking about. You can't just build a factory there, and they just, don't know. It was bizarre.
I have a question because I'm trying to do a timeline in my head.
Yeah.
The one with the orange lights, the flat discs that look orange, was that before that?
That was before that. That was before that.
How much farther?
I think it was the year before.
Okay.
What we did by putting the caravan there, of course, there were people coming forward and saying, well, I saw something X amount of years ago. So what we realized was that the sightings that were being reported to us were nothing new. They had been, witnessed probably for decades, if not further. And there was also local mythology and folklore attached to some of them. We had a letter from a gentleman in the area, and he said he'd seen these 2 red lights. So we'll go and speak to him anyway. And we phoned him up and said, can we come on such a time? And yeah, no problem. When we got there, what we thought was a village was about 8 houses scattered around with a fell, moors in the background. None of the houses had any numbers on them. So we didn't know. We got his address, but we didn't know which one he was. So we just knocked on the door of the first one and said, we're looking to speak. I can't remember his name now, Mr. Smith. And obviously it was the wrong house. And it was a lady actually that answered. And she said to us, have you come about the ghost dog?
Wow.
No. And what it was, we found out that these two red lights that this gentleman had reported to us used to sort of go down through the village and disappear. And of course, the folklore then became attached. These were the two red eyes of the phantom dog, the ghost dog. There was no dog at all. It was just these two lights.
Wow.
And, so we realized, there was myths and folklore grown up because of these sightings. And the sightings were these strange luminosities, call them what you will, not ghost dogs, and anything, but it was just fascinating. And
I'm going to ask a bizarre question of you. Okay.
Bizarre question. Yeah. Is that what you said?
Yes, bizarre.
Okay.
What kind of fauna and flora and what type of animals were natural to that area?
Natural. This is a semi-rural area.
Yes.
Carlton Moor was primarily at that point game birds, but they were bred there. So when you looked across the moor, it was covered in heather. And that, of course, housed the game birds. They nest in the heather. They're not in trees. Right. There's no trees or anything like that. Some of other parts of the Yorkshire Dales have sheep. A lot of sheep because they can just let them go on the moors. So that's all there is. There's a few farms and things of that nature will have cows and so on. But there was one quarry in the area. But it's mainly sheep, cows, little farms.
What was quarried in the quarry? What were they quarrying?
Yeah, there's a lot of UFO sightings or landings near quarries. I've noticed that.
Yeah, well, we have a lot of limestone. A lot of the hills are made of limestone, so it was a quarry for that. There was no coal mines there, but it was pretty rural and still is today. It's a beautiful part of the country. I'm biased because I'm a Yorkshireman. But it is a beautiful part of the country. There's old houses, there's castles, few and far between, but there are some. There's some Norman fortifications in the area as well, one or two. So it's got a history with it as well, but nothing out of the ordinary compared to other parts of the country. It's just very pretty.
Well, I do want to get to your research into the Pascagoula case at some point, but I'm also curious about this. When you're investigating all these landings, did you ever find any that you could absolutely correlate to some reason they were there?
No. I mean, in the 90s, again, quite by chance, I started to look into abduction accounts. And that happened quite by chance. We set up what we called a UFO hotline. In reality, it was an answer phone at my house. And the first lady that phoned and left a message was a local lady. And she said, a few years back when I was 16, I saw something over the city of Leeds. And I only went to speak to her because she was local. I phoned her back, a lady called Jane. And she told me, she lived with her parents, didn't live where she lived now, and seen these lights over the city of Leeds. And then out of the blue, she was now married with a young child herself. She's about the same age as me. And she said, I was also abducted. Totally not prepared for this. I had a colleague with me as well. She told me that she'd had this encounter. She was taken to some fields nearby. I won't go into great detail, but various things happened to her. And she told her family. They didn't know what to do. She went to see her doctor. And he gave her some pills. He says, these pills will make it go away. This was an era in Britain. If a housewife went to the doctor, she was given pills, Yeah. And in the end, I was kind of the last hope. And she was very grateful that I sat there and listened to her, didn't laugh, didn't ask stupid questions. And in fact, Jane went on to have a number of experiences, most of whom I shared with the late Bud Hopkins. I would literally record my discussions with Jane, type them up, send them to Bud, and he'd say, ask her these questions, Philip. Have you thought about asking that? And we worked, he helped out in that respect. But that led me into the other field of abduction. And again, it was quite by chance. And what happened was I'd done a couple of articles with a national newspaper here called The People. And the journalist I worked with was a chap called Carl Negatis. Carl was a very well-respected journalist, and he packed in, he finished, and he set up his own company, his own public relations company. And one of his clients was a TV production company. And they said to Carl, we want to make a documentary about alien abductions. Carl said, I know just the man. And he got in touch with me.
Wow.
No, I knew a bit, so they paid us a small fee to kind of do some research and put together a proposal. And for whatever reason, they then said, no, we're going to scrub it. So I said to Carl, that's a shame. It would have made a great documentary. There isn't such a thing on British TV. It would make a great book as well. Carl said, hang on, because one of my other clients is a publisher. So I said to Carl, if he'll give us a contract, we'll write it together. And they said, okay. So I literally in the early 90s set off to interview as many people who'd had these experiences as I could. I would go from one end of the country to the other. The only place I didn't go to was Northern Ireland. And that was because I couldn't find anybody to interview there. But had I would have got my car, gone on the ferry across to Ireland, and I would send the reports or the encounters or whatever to Carl, and we put the manuscript together. And we published that book in 1994. We called it Without Consent, simply because I was looking in the diary. That's the revised issue. I'm looking in the diary and I looked the word abduct or abduction up, and it waffled on a bit, and then it said blah, 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 without consent. So I thought that's perfect for the title. So that's a revised edition you have on the screen now. I updated that a few years back with some extra material.
That was the first book I got of yours. And yeah, it's a very good read. It's
and Carl sadly passed away just not that long ago. But again, it came about quite by accident, and I've often, I don't know about you guys, Dolly and Preston, but if I plan anything, it tends not to work. So I best just go with the flow and see what happens.
Yeah, well, so what do you think about the whole connection to the paranormal and cryptids and ghosts and all of this to UFO phenomenon?
Well, what I was trying to lead on to, one of the things we did when I was speaking to all these witnesses, the close encounter witnesses, I asked them, what do you, I'm on the outside looking in, what do you think is the nature and origin of your experience or experiences? Some were definite, these are beings not of this world. Yeah. There were a number of others who thought they were a spiritual encounter of some description. And others just said, I don't know, Philip. That's why we contacted you, trying to find out. We even had one young man, although he didn't honestly believe this, but he blamed the Russians because the encounter had terrified the living daylights out of him. And of course, the bad guys at that point in the 80s when his encounter happened were, the Reds over in the Soviet Union. It was just his way of rationalizing it. So I'm sat there thinking, well, these people have confronted this phenomena firsthand, face to face, and they don't know what's happened. So it makes it increasingly more difficult for me to figure out. And at the end of the day, even if I did have a theory or an idea, who the hell am I to tell them?
Well, I think we have a lot of different things going on too, and we have a tendency to conflate it all into one thing. And I'm not so sure that is wise, because people do see ghosts and spirits. And there are, of course, little people and fairies and this sort of thing.
Well, here's a story for you. You mentioned fairies. My late mum was from Northern Ireland. And when she was a youngster, they lived in quite a rural place in Northern Ireland. For example, she used to have to walk 5 miles to get to school on a morning. I mean, walk. And she said where they lived, there was a small stream on the running by, and they had nothing to, and she said I would go down to the stream and amuse myself, play. And
Sure.
she said, one day I encountered a fairy. It was a little person. It was a woman. So it's a female fairy, complete with pretty clothes and wings. And she conversed with it. And she said, the fairy gave me a little tiny bottle to drink out of. And she said, if I drink this, you'll never have an accident. And that was it. And I said, I often wondered if my father wasn't an accident, but down the decades, as I got older, I would ask my mum about this. And I said, was it real, Mum? She said, well, it was real to me, son. And she told my children, her grandchildren, she told them the same story. And I have no reason to disbelieve her, again, make of it what you will.
Yeah. I was a young teenager, and I had just gone to the barn to work with the horses and was coming back, and through the field. And I was listening to my radio, and all of a sudden I saw something in front of me, and I looked down, and there's this little fairy sitting on the ground looking at me. And she was just swaying back and forth, listening to the music I was listening to. And she said, I like it. And so I held my little Juliet radio out and let her listen. And we both just sort of like enjoyed music. And I said, who are you? And she said, I'm a little person, a little fairy. And her clothes were not as good as I would have hoped they would have been. They looked ragged. And I said, I have something for you. I had Barbies at the house. And I said, I have some really nice clothes that I even made myself. I will bring them back to you and give them to you. You need some pretty things. And she seemed delighted as all get out. When I ran back, she was gone. And I was, and I thought, I'm losing my mind. And I said, I'm not just going to walk away with the clothes. I promised them to her. So we were near a tree. So I went to the tree and I put them in a pile for her, and put a piece of paper under it and wrapped it nicely for her and left. I waited about a day, two, and I went back and they were gone.
Yeah.
And I thought,
surprising.
I've never had another experience like that for the rest of my life.
No,
but that was real. It happened to me.
Well, it kind of reminds me of an abduction case. It's actually in the book without consent. I'll mention his name. His name is pseudonym we use for him is a chap called David Thomas. And he lived in a place called Pwllheli on the west coast of Wales. And I went to interview David a couple of times. And like a lot of young people in the area at that time in the 1980s, he was unemployed. And he said, I've been to a friend's birthday and I was walking home, and he said, I wasn't drunk. He said, we didn't have enough money to get drunk. It was only about 18 at the time. He said, and he said, I'm walking down the road and there's, I don't know what you call it in the States, but we call it a snicket. It's a little passage up the side of a field.
All right.
And he said, I could see a light in this field. And he said, part of me was drawn to go and find out, but another part of me was saying, don't go anywhere near it. Keep going. Anyway, he went up this little path and there's some hedges in front of him and he's looking into the field. And he said, there's something on the ground that looks like the space shuttle. It's got no wheels on it. It's actually on the ground. He says there are these humanoids with, he assumed there was some kind of headgear on, shaped like what we call a 50-pence piece, hexagonal, like that. And then he felt this hand on his shoulder. The next thing he knows, he's on board this thing. Now, this was an era when we used to have the Sony Walkman, the little thing you carry on with the cassettes in it. Well, David had his cassette on. He wasn't playing it at the time, but he had it with him, and he liked rock music. He said, I'm laying on this table, and these beings are there, and it doesn't know if it was a window or a viewing screen, but you could see the planets going by. And they took his tape from his Walkman, and he liked heavy metal music, and they put it in this console. And he said, if I wasn't already freaked, I'm in this otherworldly environment, and then there's, I don't know if it was Def Leppard or some such rock band blaring out.
Wow.
And he said, and it literally frightened the living daylights.
What year was that?
84, I think. Don't quote me on that, but it's in the 80s.
You want to hear a funny?
Well, let me finish the story.
Okay, all right.
He ends back up on the road.
Yeah.
He's stopped by a police car because he's staggering down. The police car take him home. David was his mum was a single parent, so he'd no dad, and he was literally frightened to death. The following day, his mum went to the village, to the library, and she could find one UFO book. That's all she could find, and in it was the telephone number and the address of a group in Oxford.
Cool.
They were called Contact UK. I knew them, and she phoned them. And they said, we'll phone you, we'll contact you, and we'll make an arrangement to come and see you. That night, David, is still terrified, can't sleep. So it started to snow. So she put David in the back of the car and drove him unannounced to Oxford and knocked on this gentleman's door of the UFO group, and he's cowering in the back of the car.
How old is he again? Did you say?
It was 18, I believe.
All right.
So when I spoke to him, obviously the encounter had been and gone, and he'd managed to find a job at a local hotel. And he said, please don't tell any of my friends. He says, but I now write poetry, but spontaneous poetry. He said, I don't sit down and think about it. I'm working away and it just comes to me. So I'll grab a napkin and I'll write it on the napkin or whatever.
Wow.
And so I said to him, what do you think was the cause of your experience? He's the one that blamed the Russians. He didn't believe that. So when the first edition of Without Consent came out in 1994, a number of the people that are featured in it, I sent them a copy. Not everyone, but a number of them. David was one of them. And he acknowledged receipt of it. And I think it was 3 or 4 years before I heard from him again. And he says, I've only just sat down to read it, Philip, because I was that scared. He'd now grown up, got his own family. And he told me that in between, he actually went for hypnotherapy, not regressive hypnosis, hypnotherapy. I said, well, why? He said, because I had nightmares about it. I couldn't sleep.
Well, okay. Well, before I tell you what I'm going to tell you, what frightened him so much in that encounter?
I think the fact that he was in this otherworldly environment, which was scary enough. There was these creatures with these funny shaped heads. He believed that was some kind of headgear. And then it just seemed to be more freaky, if it could be, when there's this heavy metal music coming out. And he said it just amplified the weirdness of it all was just amplified by that. And
did he have missing time with this? In other words, did he have a long direct memory, or did he have little bits of missing time?
No, he had no missing time at all. He remembered every single part of it, pretty much. He never asked for hypnosis or anything like that. He certainly remembered a lot of it, if not all of it. And he recounted it all to his mum. I spoke to his mum, and she was still as bemused as he was.
Did he connect his desire to write poetry to that experience, do you think?
Yes, indeed. And what happened was, I then began to speak to some of the other abductees, as we call them, to find if I call them side effects, if they'd had any side effects. There was a lady down in Northamptonshire. She became a spiritual healer.
Yeah.
And she connected it right with the encounter she had.
I've heard this.
I want to tell you something real quick, okay? So you understand, you need to hear this, okay? I pilot UFOs. I pilot a craft. I've been piloting since I was 19 years old, full time. I don't pilot now because they're not here now. Okay. I stayed back to bring messages forward. As far as I know, I'm the only idiot who flies for them, because my contact who's in the craft with me, indwelling it, lets me. He plays for me any music I want to hear when I fly. And I like rock and roll. I like all music, but sometimes I really, really am in the mood for it. And I like heavy metal as well. Preston can tell you the truth of this. He can validate, because it's one of the first things I told him. I don't even start up craft without a certain piece of music playing for me. It's just somehow embedded into my memory that I do this for a reason. For a while there in the 80s, I was flying in England. Okay. I would be taking off what I was doing and go to England from time to time. And I have some memories of people there not reacting well to us being with them. Okay. And you've just jotted my memory all to hell and back. Okay. It doesn't matter what we do. Sometimes it just doesn't help. And they are it's an internal, you're brought up to be afraid anyway. You know, humanity is learned to be afraid.
Fear of the unknown is a big thing.
And it doesn't matter what we do. What I find interesting is that he is absolutely, totally aware of this entire encounter, which encourages me, just so you know. But one of the reasons that he might like poetry so much is because the craft itself is indwelt by a being who has no corporeal body. They indwell the craft, okay? And we fly together. And he is a monster for bringing out any inclinations you might have, because he can totally read who you are very quickly. And will like niggle you for it. He is a big poet himself. He loves poetry. Okay. And I'm sitting here going, that had to be us. I would dare say to you that he should, are you still in contact with him?
No, I'm not in contact with him anymore, unfortunately.
Oh, well, if he ever hears this, if it ever happens, look up my story. And that might help you, because every now and then we will pull somebody on board who is psychic. Okay. And we're looking to see where they're at, how they're doing.
Seems like a lot of contactees are psychic.
And
it's interesting. I mean, we had another lady called Linda Jones in Manchester.
Yeah.
Linda went out the back of where she lived into some fields with flowers in it with her daughter. She had a long encounter, so I won't go through all the details. But I said to Linda, how can you best describe your encounter to me? She says, Philip, it was biblical.
Wow,
you know,
really?
Yeah. And then there's another gentleman who, again, in the early 70s, called John Day, and he lived in Essex with his wife Sue and children. And John and Sue lived in a little place called Aveley in Essex. And they've been out for the evening. I think they've been to see their parents. They were driving back, and John wanted to be back for a certain time, because in those days, come midnight, the TV was finished. You know, there was no TV then in England after a certain time. You got what we called the test card. It was just a static
we had
picture.
That too, yeah.
So he wanted to get back. I don't know if it was the snooker or something like that. As they're going into the village, there's a bank of green mist across the road. So he drives through it, no problem. The radio goes a bit wonky. And there's a bump. And strangely, his wife, Sue, turns to him and said, "Are you all here?" So they get home, they put the children to bed. He comes down, switches the TV on. What's this? The test card. This shouldn't be right. There was this period of missing time. We used to have this, what we call the speaking clock here. You could pick your phone up and dial a number and it would tell you what time it was. He even did that. And he couldn't understand where this period of time had gone. So he went to bed. The next morning, him and his wife, Sue, got up and it was all starting to flood back to them. It was all coming back. But irrespective of that, I tracked down John Day many years after his encounter. Very few people had ever spoken to him. He was now living in a place called Saxmundham in Suffolk. Mm. Now, John by profession was a carpenter, but in Saxmundham, he was making the most beautiful dolls' houses. I mean, fantastic. I mean, you would, if you'd have bought one, you wouldn't let your children play with them. They were that, you know, they were that good. Anyway, he told us what had happened. And again, I said to him, John, what was the nature and origin of your experience? And he says, it's very difficult to try and tell you, Philip. He said, because not only have I not got the words in my vocabulary, we as a species don't have them. And he says, the best way I can describe it, if you go to a film studio, they'll have a set built for whatever movie they're working on, and you can touch that, you know, knock on it, it's physical. But when you look behind it, it's not real, is it?
Wow.
And he left it at that. I found that very profound. I still can't get my head around it.
He's trying to describe the craft as alive. That's what he's trying to tell you.
And what was really interesting, because, like I said, not many people had spoken to John in person. There were very few photographs of him. And of course, the few that were when he was a young fella. He's now 20 odd years gone by. And I went to a lecture in London, and it was given by a very skeptical chap. And he's talking about alien abductions. And lo and behold, who sat on the front row of the audience but John Day? But nobody knew who he was apart from me. And I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
And this skeptical guy starts talking about John's encounter. Thought,
oh, wow.
So it came to the end. Anybody got any questions? Of course, John's hand picked up. Oh, no, boy, did he make this guy look a fool. You know, but it was just one of those things that happened. And like I say, the book came about without consent by accident. And I updated it a few years back because I'd still been in touch with other people. And as far as I'm aware, it's still the only book in the UK that deals with encounters only in the UK, abductions only in the UK, nowhere else.
Wow. And it's the only one.
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Amazing.
Do you have, like here, do you ever have UFO expos there where people come together and talk to people who have experiences or knowledge or researchers?
Well,
like
one of the things I used to do, I was a conference organizer.
Okay.
And I started with the Yorkshire UFO Society. I wasn't the only one, with 2 or 3 of us involved. I think the first one we had was 1984, 85. I left the Yorkshire UFO Society at the end of the decade. I joined BUFORA. I did many things for them, but one of which was conference organizer. And we moved around the country and did a few places. But we settled in a city called Sheffield in South Yorkshire. And we had some rather large events there. And of course, one memory that sticks in my mind when we come to this subject is Whitley Strieber. I invited Whitley to come and speak in Sheffield one year, and he did, and it was the first time he'd ever done, and put on a fantastic presentation. And then there was question and answers at the end, and it was a young lady. She put her hand up and she said, are we getting any closer to knowing what's behind these experiences? And I've reminded Whitley about this, but he's forgotten about it completely. And again, it's something I found to be very profound. He said, we're learning to ask better questions. And that's always stuck with me. And this was just at the Q&A at the end of his presentation. And I thought, he might well be right. It kind of sort of latched into what John Day was saying about we knock on it, the film set is false, but it's real, isn't it? But it's still false. And John just said, make of it what you will. And Whitley pretty much said the same. He's gone on to do a lot more since then, of course. But it was just So I was a conference organizer for many years.
That's awesome. It really is up to all of us to make up our minds about what we understand or what we know. You know, you can hear the stories of everybody, and it's still up to us individually, each one, to take that information and research for ourselves and make up our own minds what we understand about it. Absolutely. And one of the things that ET contactees bring forward to everybody is that one of the things that they've learned from their experiences and from ET themselves is that we need to learn to use our abilities. We're all psychic. You know, we live in a place, you know, they're wide open psychic, they communicate psychically, and they want us to experience that. They want us to open our minds to that and learn everything we can about everything. You know, it's a really interesting thing to hear people talking about all this, and your evidence, your research, the fact that you're doing these things and who you've come in contact with intrigues the holy cow out of me, because now my next question is going to be this. How much more is this occurring in the UK now? I mean, is there a wider level of it going on? Researchers coming out, people coming out? Is it more accepted there?
Yeah, are people still skeptical? I'm curious.
Yeah, a bit of everything, really. You know, I think media-wise, that comes and goes. Sometimes they will take it serious. Other times they're just looking for a cheap story. But certainly in the 1990s, the media tended to take it a bit more serious, because we had John Mack, of course, you know, Harvard professor, involved in the subject. And so that helped. Some of the tabloid newspapers have since bit the dust, so we haven't got them to worry about, because in the summer, the football season's finished and Parliament's in recess, so they used to just look for a story. And we always used to have our conferences in that gap, because we could, even though sometimes it might, you know, take the mickey out of us a little bit, we were guaranteed getting some publicity pretty much, and encourage people to come along. But in the end, the conferences grew and grew and grew. We didn't have to rely on the media. People would come back every year. So, you know, we're very pleased about that. So it swings and roundabouts. What, sadly, the UFO groups have gone, pretty much. When I joined the British UFO Research Association, when I left them, they had, you know, an annual conference that had 400 or 500 people in attendance. They had 1,000 members. They had their own magazine called UFO Times. Now it's all gone. There's no meetings. There's no nothing. There's about a handful of them. There used to be lots of regional UFO groups in the various towns and cities, and I used to make it, you know, a point of actually going to visit these regional UFO groups to build up a relationship with them. If I got if I knew somebody in Cardiff and I get a sighting in Cardiff, it's miles away, I'll pass it on to them, let them deal with it. They're local. A lot of that has gone.
Do you see any? Here, let me ask real quick. Do you see any movement towards disclosure in the UK? I mean, here in the US, it's practically front page news.
Yeah,
I'm not hearing much about the UK in that regard.
I mean, we had the MOD had a place where you could report sightings to. It was called Air Staff 2A, and that was only part of their job. It was a very, very minor part of it. They also dealt with politicians' inquiries, low-flying incidents, blah, 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 blah.
Is MUFON there?
Yes, MUFON. Well, I was the MUFON rep for England for a while, but MUFON is still represented here. So that office was closed in 2009. So our Ministry of Defence will not accept any sightings from Joe Public. They'll only accept them from military and responsible people, i.e. police force, that kind of thing. So there's no way you can report it. All the MOD files have been declassified. They're all at the National Archives. So they say. Well, so they say. The ones that we know of are, and some of them are very interesting. Don't get me wrong, they haven't scrubbed the interesting ones out. There are some that they admit themselves they've got no idea. But there was another department, and that was called DI-55, Defence Intelligence 55. So when you reported something to the air staff, they would automatically copy in DI-55. And on rare occasions, DI-55 would conduct an investigation. But they wouldn't go back to Air Staff 2A and tell them about it because they didn't have the security clearance. They were above them. And so there are one or two interesting cases which they investigated. But they were primarily looking to see if any of these reports were Soviet incursions. But of course, they didn't find any Soviet incursions. But nonetheless, they still investigated the encounter, the sighting, the report, or whatever. So as for disclosure in the UK, there is nothing. And I don't think there's any. I'm very skeptical of it anyway. We seem to think that our security forces, our politicians, our military, somewhat better than us. Well, they might have more money than us. But I've never investigated a UFO. I've investigated UFO sightings. By the time I've got there, they've been and gone. And that would be the same if I was from the MOD or from MI5. It would be in and gone. So I'm not of the opinion that they've got anything. In fact, I think they're as baffled as the rest of us, to be honest.
Or they know and they have it very tightly controlled. Could
well be.
Yeah.
But I think what we have in the UK is called the Security Act that everybody signs, and it's called the Official Secrets Act. And
there you go. Yep.
Well, I'll give you an example of how absurd it can be. Again, going back to the 1980s when I was part of the Yorkshire UFO Society, I had a colleague there. He worked in a textile mill, and they made cloth. And he says to me, "I've signed the Official Secrets Act." He's called Graham, and Graham had a bit of a sense of humour, so I thought, I'm waiting for the punchline here, you know. And I said, "No, you haven't." He says, "Yes, I have." So, well, why have you signed the Official Secrets Act? You work in a textile mill. He said, "Well, some of the cloth that we make is used for military dress uniforms."
Wow.
So I said, "Okay, is this some kind of super secret cloth with special properties?" He says, "No, we use it for other things as well. But because we supply the MOD with it, we have to sign the Official Secrets Act." There is nothing secret about it at all.
It's not bulletproof or anything.
No. And that just shows you, how absurd it can be. It was probably right from when it was, first invented, but those days have gone. It's like the pub. Britain's famous for its pubs. The pub licensing hours that we have were invented for the First World War. So it was to keep people out of the pubs and keep them working in the factories, making the bombs and bullets for the war effort. But we still have these archaic laws, and the Official Secrets Act is exactly the same. So when somebody says, "Oh, I've signed the Official Secrets Act," it doesn't necessarily mean anything at all.
Wow. I mean, do you have any reports of really, credible ones of UFO crashes like Roswell? I know there's Rendlesham. That's very controversial.
The only one I as you mentioned in the introduction, Preston, I run a small little publishing venture called Flying Disc Press. And a couple of years back, I published a little book by a UK researcher called Mark Ollie. Mark lives in Cheshire, not that far away. And it's called Europe's Roswell. And it says 40 years since disclosure. And it was an event that happened in Wales, a place near a place called Aberystwyth in 1983. Basically, there's a farm there with some woods. Farmer gets up one morning and this material is scattered across his farm and into the woodland. Something has hit the treetops. The security services from the nearby Air Force Base and the police, it made the newspaper. They come and cleaned it all up. And we happened to get some pieces of it because whilst they cleaned it up in the field, there were still chunks of this stuff in the woods. And it was collected. And a gentleman by the name of Gary Rowe investigated it. Gary kindly, as we speak, just recently supplied me with some more pieces of it. So I got little pieces in a bag about this big, and they have gone to a laboratory in Greece to be analysed. Gary is convinced they are not of this earth, and he thinks it's a waste of time me having them analysed again because you can't prove that. But I said, well, I've got these. I've got an offer to have them analysed. Why would I not take it? Because if I didn't, then somebody would say, well, why aren't you having them analysed? So either way, I couldn't really win. So I thought the best action to take was to let the lab in Greece have a look at them and see what they have to say. That's the only time, Preston and Dolly, in all these years that I've been involved with something like that. And it's fascinating to do that. I go back to my early days when I first sat there, wide-eyed and gormless at the Yorkshire UFO Society. Never thought I'd be involved in anything like that. So we'll wait and see what they say.
How long ago was that?
That's last week.
Ah, did you send all of it, or do you still have a piece?
I've still got some pieces. Yes, I still have some.
Guard them with your life.
I sent the laboratory in Greece the largest piece we have. I sent them a photo of it first, and there's some writing on a piece of paper behind it so they can see the relative size of it. And I said, is that big enough? It's the biggest piece I have anyway. They said, yeah, that'll be fine. So I've got the other pieces as backup, if you like. You know, we can always go somewhere else with those if need be, but they are there. And we've got photographs of other parts of it as well. But it's just fascinating. I never thought I'd come across anything like that. And I'm very grateful to Gary for supplying these pieces, and also the laboratory in Greece, which has come about via a colleague there. And we'll wait and see what happens.
The first results, the first laboratory, did they give you a rundown of what they found out about it? Chemicals, metals, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, it's published in Mark's book, and Mark's of the opinion that it may be something spooky, or it could be something that we've been working on but just wasn't around at the time, and it may be something secret, but nonetheless man-made. So yeah. I told Mark, look, I've got some more of this material. It's metal. I'm gonna try and get it analysed. And he said, okay, let's see. You know, let's see if we've got that analysis. Let's see if it duplicates that or says something different. We'll see. That's all been supplied to the guys in Greece, by the way. A copy of Mark's book and everything that's in it. There's nothing, hidden from them, so they already know his opinions.
How did you send it to them?
I've sent it by tracked and signed for. That's the best way I can think of sending it. Because we're still in Europe, it's not that difficult. I sent the previous pieces that we had overseas, and there was no problem with that. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah. How would you ensure something like that? How much does that work?
Yeah, well, I've actually put it in a little jewelry box. So it's in a jewelry box, in an envelope, inside another bigger envelope, and it's all padded. And I put not just my address on the envelope, it's on the inside as well. So if it got torn open, there's my address. It can be returned from whence it came. But I don't think I'm not worried about anything like that. And if it does, it does. Things do go astray. I've still got some more left. Still got some more, so that's not a problem.
So what inspired you ultimately to start this publishing company, Flying Disc Press?
What it was, Preston, I mean, you're a well-known author yourself. I just found it difficult to deal with the conventional publishers. Because no matter how much work you've done in this field, when you were talking to them, it was like talking to the wall. And then I have a friend called John Hanson. John's a retired police detective, and he lives in the Midlands. And John had already set up his own publishing concern called Haunted Skies. I would highly recommend it to anyone. And he said, well, you don't need the conventional publisher anymore. You can do it yourself digitally. So I was still in full-time employment at this point. And John gave me the sort of details of how you do it. And I thought, okay. What happened was I was sent a manuscript by a colleague called Peter in Poland, not for being published. Peter is great that speak in English, but it's not so hot. It's written English, and he wanted me to. He's a UFO researcher, by the way, and a magazine editor. He wanted me to read this and give him some feedback on his written English, which I did. But I read it and I thought, this is make a damn good book. Because 95% of what was in this book I'd never heard of. And I thought, well, if I haven't, simply because the fact it had never been published in English. So I asked Peter and he said, yeah. I jumped in with both feet. And in 2015, I launched Flying Disc Press and UFOs Over Poland by Peter Cielebius was the first book I published. I made a lot of mistakes. I admit that, but I honestly believe I did the right thing. And we were off and running. I was working for one of the high street banks at the time, at a big place in Leeds. So I thought, what I will do, I'll just maybe tick over with Flying Disc Press until I retire. You know, this is 2015. I've still got another 10 years or so to go. And then in 2016, I took seriously ill again. I've had a lot of illness down the years. And I got the opportunity to take early retirement, so I did. And I put all my efforts into Flying Disc Press.
Wonderful.
And since then, I've published books from Romania, from Japan, from Italy, as well as United States and England and UK as well. Most have been UFO books. There's a couple of paranormal ones thrown in for good measure. And I took ill last year, so I had to put Flying Disc Press on hold, if you like. But we're up and running again in a reduced capacity, but nonetheless, my new book, Pascagoula Uncovered, is out. There'll be another book out later this year, and then there'll be more coming next year. One's from a guy in Brazil. So I wanted to try and keep the international element in it if I could, simply because despite the amazing technology that we have now, the one thing that is still a barrier is the language barrier.
Yeah.
And so the book from Brazil next year, thankfully, the gentleman speaks better English than I do. So it didn't need much work on it as far as that was concerned. And so, yeah, and I'm writing another book myself for publication next year as well. And there'll be one or two others coming along at the same time. So it just came about by chance. And had my friend John Hanson not sort of given me that push, I may not have done it, or maybe didn't not started when I did. But I'm glad I did. And I'm happy with how we've gone so far.
Yeah, well, me too. Congratulations, because it's
Thank you.
becoming one of the major UFO, publication houses out there. There's really no one who focuses just on that. So that's amazing.
Yeah, again, we've had some success. I don't necessarily publish books just for a commercial success. Sometimes I will publish something simply because I believe it needs to be out there.
Yeah. It's still a niche market, this subject.
Yeah, even if it only sells a handful of copies, I still think if I believe it needs to be available, then that's all I need to know. And if we get a commercial success along with it, that's great.
Wow. All right. So what got you interested in the whole Pascagoula case? Because you've got, this first book with Irina McCammon Scott. We had her on the show, by the way. She's lovely.
She is. She's
really
absolutely amazing. What happened was
this one, and then Pascagoula 73. So
that's the documentary. Case. Yeah. Well, what happened was I first heard about the Pascagoula case back in the 80s. I read about it in a magazine, and it always stuck in my mind, especially the shape of the creatures, because there was nothing else like it. As I mentioned earlier, in the 90s, I was a conference organizer for BUFORA. And one of my colleagues was in contact with Charlie Hickson at the time. And we tried to get Charlie to come to the UK to speak. And he agreed, but something went wrong and he wasn't able to come. So I'd always had that in my mind. And then when I set up Flying Disc Press, I knew that Charles Hickson had published his own book with a chap called William Mendez. And you could buy a copy online, but there were few and far between. And of course, they wanted an arm and a leg for it. So I bought a copy and I read it. And I thought, I'd like to get the rights to republish this. You know, people shouldn't have to pay $150. That's Charlie.
That's right. Outrageous, yeah.
Yeah. So I managed to get the rights. And I thought, I know Charlie passed away in 2011. I wasn't sure about Calvin Parker. I couldn't find anything about Calvin after 2013, but I couldn't find any obituary. So I thought he must be alive. And I eventually found him. And I got an email. I emailed him. He gave me his phone number. And all I wanted was an interview with him. I thought I'll just put that in the back of this, you know, this republished book. And I spoke to him. He was very polite, very nice. It obviously wasn't going to tell me an awful lot. So I arranged to ring him again. What I didn't know is literally just a few weeks before I called Calvin, he'd been at a funeral. One of his friends had died. And as he's coming out of the funeral home, he signed the book of condolence, you know, and he signed it Calvin Parker. And the people behind him seeing his name are doing the old wink, wink, nudge, nudge, you know, that's the alien man. Calvin found it very disrespectful. And his wife, Waynette, who'd been with him from day one, of course, she said, off the cuff, I think, why don't you write your own damn book? And then people can find out what happened. I don't even know what happened to you. And they won't have to point, you know. And he said, yes, darling, of course, darling, I will, darling, you know. And so he tells me this story. He said, I've told my wife I'm going to write a book. I said, well, I'll publish it. Oh, no. So why not? He said, well, every time I give an interview with someone, Philip, it always turns out wrong. They always add things, they change things, they make a mess of it. So I'll tell you what, I will send you a contract, and in that, I'll write in the contract that I'm not allowed to change anything without your permission.
Good for you.
It's simple as that. And I sent him it, and he said, okay, much to my surprise. So, you know, we laid out the outline of the book, and Calvin would literally do one chapter at a time. We start at the beginning. He'd send it to me. I'd ask him questions. What's this? I don't understand that. You need to tell me a bit more about that. And then eventually we'd end up with a chapter and he'd sign it off. And even at the end of the book, I said, I will not publish this until you say, okay. And in 2018, we published Pascagoula, the closest encounter. And much to our surprise, it was successful. And we were up and running.
Wow.
And we followed that up with another one by Calvin. So what happened was when it came out in 2018, Calvin did some local media and what have you. And people saw him being treated with respect, whereas back in 1973, him and Charlie were just laughed at. So there's been a shift there. So we got one or two people come out of the woodwork and said, you know, I've seen things as well at that time. So we did Pascagoula. The story continues in 2019. One of the local charities in the area raised some funds and had a historical marker put near the site of where it happened. It was officially unveiled by the mayor. You know, local media covered it. I've seen Calvin on local television crying his eyes out, standing next to this. And what was nice, Calvin was given a copy of this historical marker, so he has one on the wall. And I was given a copy as well, and I have one on my wall. And that's there for everyone to see. And what happened was the momentum kept going. More people stepped forward, said, I saw something that night. Because I've been involved so long, Preston, I knew a lot of people.
Right.
Many of whom were still involved in the subject. And I said, you know, have you got anything on the Pascagoula case? And I'd already published a couple of books by Dr. Irena Scott. And I found it difficult phoning people across the Atlantic. Trying to get the time right. Because no matter which computer I looked it up on it and followed what it told me, I seemed to get it wrong. And then they were obviously a bit wary because of this strange sounding man phoning them from across the Atlantic. So I asked Irina, Dr. Scott, if she would come on board. And then rather than me doing it, she do it. And she's great, Philip, yeah. And when Calvin wrote his first book, he did an interview with a local journalist called Karen Nelson. Karen was a bit skeptical, but she came and met Calvin and interviewed him, went to the location, and at the same time, she made a little mini film. So when you read her article online, this little mini film was embedded with it. Somebody took that film and put it on YouTube. And I was reading the comments underneath it. And there's one that stuck out and it said, my mother and father were on the opposite side of the river that night. They saw the UFO. So I found this person. It was a young lady. I explained who we were. Would you ask your mum and dad if we could speak to them, please? She came back and said, yeah, it's Jerry and Maria Blair. It's their telephone number.
Wow.
So I rang them. Jerry was there, but he wasn't the most talkative of men. Let's put it that way. He was quiet. But Maria said, yeah, her husband, Jerry, at the time used to work offshore. The company he worked for would supply the oil rigs. And he was supposed to be going offshore that night. So they were on the opposite side of the river on a little pier. And the boat was there, but no captain. It was late. But it's getting dark. Jerry's not in a good mood because he's late. And Maria says, coming down the river is this blue thing. She says it stopped opposite, seemed to maneuver around as if it was either lost or was looking for somebody. And she said, at that point, we decided to walk down the pier and put my husband's clothes on the boat. The boss still hadn't come. Mm-hmm. And she says, there's this huge splash in the water next to her. And these are her words, not mine. She's out of the water, came this grey man. And it went right up to her nose there. I mean, literally right there. And then it went back into the water and was gone.
What, a humanoid figure?
Yeah, yeah.
Was it
She
the
called
same
it
description as the?
Yeah. Let me get to that. And she says she ran up to the boat, threw her husband's clothes on it, and she said this was about 9 o'clock, estimated. When she ran back down the pier, terrified, because she had to go that way to get back to the car, it was now midnight. Jerry was gone for a few days. When he came back, he said, don't tell anybody, they'll think we're nuts. She'd seen Charlie and Calvin on the local news, and she said nothing. The young lady was her daughter who left that message, was her youngest daughter. She had another daughter. And I asked both daughters, what did your mum and dad say to you? She said, oh, they told us about seeing this thing, but we weren't allowed to tell anybody else. So I passed. Maria got very emotional. And I said, well, why? And she says, as if I can see something out of my peripheral vision, but I just can't quite make it out. So I passed her on to Dr. Scott, Irina. She interviewed her on the phone. She kept in touch with them. When they unveiled the historical marker down in Pascagoula, they came along. They met Calvin, and they told the local news that they'd seen this blue thing coming down the river. They didn't mention anything about the grey man. That's their prerogative.
Sure.
Anyway, unfortunately, Jerry took seriously ill. And he was literally in the hospital. He was going to have an operation the following day. And he said to Maria, phone Mr. Mantle on the phone now. And I got the phone call. And he said, Mr. Mantle, I lied. I saw everything my wife saw. And Maria actually filmed him on the cell phone. And he sat in his hospital bed with the electrodes still on his chest with the wires running down it.
Wow.
Luckily for him, he survived the operation, but it was only a respite. He was terminally ill. And he said to Maria, I got something to tell you. He says, what? She says, we too were abducted that night. And he told her the whole story, and she was as mad as hell. Even though he was seriously ill, Maria said to him, you've got some talking to do, boy, you know? And
Wow.
he told her, and she said, as he's talking to me, I realized it's not out of my peripheral vision. I've actually got my eyes screwed up, and I can only see bits of it. And she says, I look to the left, and I can see Jerry down the other side of the pier, and two of these creatures have got hold of him. And Jerry kept saying, and he pointed like this, got to keep your eye on that one. For some reason, this one was either bad or was in chat, but he told her the whole story, and then he passed away. And obviously it was upsetting for Maria. And she'd made friends with Calvin and his wife, Waynette. And she asked about hypnosis. And I said, well, look, I'm on the opposite side of the Atlantic. I'm not sure there's a lot I can do. She knew Calvin had hypnosis in the past. Anyway, I looked online. I contacted a few local hypnotherapists in the area. There was one young lady called Crystal Slaughter. Came back to us. Said, yeah, I can do regressive hypnosis. I can even go to the client's house if they don't feel comfortable coming here. So we arranged at the end of 2022 to have Maria undergo hypnosis. This is what she wanted. We conducted it at Calvin's house because she was then among friends. She knew Calvin knew how these things went. But what we didn't say to the hypnotherapist was anything about it. We just gave her a date, a time, and a location. I hired a professional cameraman to film it as well, which he did. And Maria's under hypnosis, and she, cutting a long story short, she claims that these creatures were after her eggs. And she got the impression that this encounter, there'd been others, if not with her, but certainly with Jerry. You know, it wasn't a one-off.
Rarely is it? Yeah.
Yeah, they wanted to make beings that could walk amongst us unrecognized. And that's the gist of what she said. And she was very emotional afterwards. So this is fascinating, is that a few weeks later we used Crystal again to hypnotize Calvin. And again, we had it filmed. Calvin had undergone hypnosis before, but we didn't have it on film, so we took the opportunity while we had it. And I sent some questions this time for the hypnotherapist to ask, one of which was, right, before anything starts, Calvin's sat there with Charlie on this little old pier, fishing rod in the water, just describe the scene in front of him. What is it? And he's, yeah, there's the bridge. You know, there's a little boat going up and down where it's called Noah, N-O-A-A. That's the company logo on the side of it. And right at the end, you almost miss it if you don't listen. And he says, oh, there's two figures on the other side of the river. Now, are those two figures Jerry and Maria Blair? Or are they somebody else? I don't know. But it was just a little throwaway comment he makes right at the beginning. So we have Calvin, you know, under hypnosis. He recounts the events in 1973. And that's from the documentary series that's out now on Amazon Prime. It's a 4-part series called Pascagoula 73. If you are a subscriber to Amazon Prime, it's free of charge, of course. And what happened was, we did another documentary with a British company. They were in Pascagoula. They interviewed Calvin, and they interviewed some of the other witnesses that we uncovered. sadly, Maria just wasn't available. We couldn't fix a time to interview. She wasn't dodging it. We just couldn't get hold of her. So there's a young lady in the area called Chelsea Norton Prince. Chelsea runs the Ocean Springs Historical Society. Very interested in the case. She'd met Calvin, bought a book. And I said, if we find somebody who will film an interview with Maria, will you be the host? You the person asking the questions. She says, yeah, I tried to find the cameraman that I'd used before, but he was just too busy. So I suggested to Chelsea, would you be able to film it on your iPhone? She says, yeah. I mean, it's not the best of quality, but it's better than nothing. So we set up an interview up between Chelsea and Maria Blair using the iPhone. And Maria tells the story again, what Jerry told her, what she saw, what she remembers, etc. And I'd sent Chelsea a number of questions. One of the questions was, and I just wanted Maria to confirm this, was, Maria, when did you first meet Calvin Parker? Because she first met him when they unveiled the historical monument sign. She speaks with the Mississippi way of things. She says, I first seen Calvin. In other words, I first saw him when he got abducted. She says, I could see what was happening on the other side of the river with him and Charlie. She says, wow. I thought it was men. She says, I was young and stupid in those days. I didn't know anything about UFOs.
It's not a terribly big river, is it? I mean,
no, I just thought it was men. And then things happened to her as well, of course. And, Calvin felt vindicated as a result of all this. And Maria's gone on to tell us that she's had further contacts with him on a psychological way, mind to mind, if you like. And she's also witnessed, one of the craft again.
Wow.
And again, she's not after any money or anything like that. And make of it what you will. So when Irina and I wrote Beyond Reasonable Doubt, we thought we got everything in there. But then Calvin sadly passed away in August 2023. But more information was still to be uncovered. And I let me just have a drink, excuse me.
Yeah, it's always, a case is never closed. It just never closes.
Well, I'd formed a good relationship with Calvin. We were good friends. I spoke to him on the phone about 3 days before he died. I told him I loved him like my brother. And I even said, you're not going to die. He says, why? I said, because your wife hasn't given you permission yet. So he still raised a smile. We knew he was going to die, But I was digging around. And one of the things he told me is in the early 90s, he was earning a good salary somewhere. And him and Charlie wanted to start their own little TV show on cable TV. And they would interview other people who had similar experiences.
Oh, wow.
But it never came off. He said, we did a few interviews, but it just didn't work out in the end. It's okay. I found a video that I believe it was made for that, but never used, of course. And it's actually Calvin speaking to the camera. So this goes for about half an hour. So the first part of it, he tells you about what happened in 1973 with him and Charlie. Fine. And then he stops, there's a gap, and he turns to the camera. And now I'm going to tell you something else. And he talks about another encounter in 1992. A place called, I've got it written down here, Baldwin, Louisiana.
Oh, yeah, I know where that is. Yeah.
Yeah. And he told the whole story about what happened in Baldwin, Louisiana in 1992.
To him?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. They both had previous encounters, or prior. Let me see.
Prior. Afterwards.
Afterwards, yeah.
But what I can't understand is he never mentioned a word of this in the 5 years that I got to know him.
Hmm.
So that is all in the new book, Pascagoula Uncovered. It's all in there because I, translated it verbatim. The latest interview with Maria Blair is in there, about what she saw, and about a year or so after I first met Calvin, he took ill. But we didn't know it was anything serious at the time, well, we certainly hope not. But Calvin wrote a piece, and he said, "You're not allowed to publish this until I die."
Wow.
I think he knew at that time that there was something gruesome going on. It just hadn't been confirmed. So that is published in Pascagoula Uncovered for the first time. It's Calvin's last word.
What year did he pass?
2023, August.
Yeah, just recently. God bless him. Yeah.
So that's in there as well. And I was also contacted by a gentleman called Mr. Van Payne. Back in 1973, Mr. Payne was a budding journalist, TV journalist. And he says, "Philip, I think I've got the first ever interview with Charlie and Calvin." I said, "Oh, yeah. Well, tell me what happened." He said, "I got a tip-off from the sheriff's department on the night of the incident when they were being interviewed there, October the 11th, 1973. So by the time I got there, they had gone." So he said, "I went back to the sheriff's office the following morning and they'd gone again. They'd gone to the hospital. They went to be examined at the Singing River Hospital." He said, "I went there and I missed them again. They've now been taken by the sheriff to Keesler Air Force Base, which I think was about 30 miles away, to be checked over for radiation." So he said, "I went to Keesler Air Force Base." He said, "They wouldn't let me in, but I waited outside. And of course, Charlie and Calvin came out and he asked them for an interview on camera. And he said, they refused. And they said, the only way we'd speak to you is if people can't see our faces." So he set them up like that with their backs to the camera. Mr. Payne's in the middle of them, facing the camera, did the interview with them.
Wow.
And of course, he still had it.
Oh, amazing.
What is interesting, the whole interview lasts for about 3 minutes. There's no smoking gun there. It's just historical because it shows you there that they're telling the same story then as they did down the years.
Right.
Well, yeah, like the secret police tape too, or that was in the drawer. Right?
But also interesting, of course, this was on celluloid. This wasn't video. There's other interviews on this piece of film. The next interview is with the gentleman who worked for the civil defense. It was the meteorologist. And hey presto, he caught something on radar that night. And Mr. Payne's in his office at the Civil Defence Meteorology Department or whatever, and he's interviewing him. Nobody's ever seen a word of it. That's all in the new book, Pascagoula Uncovered.
Is there more than one?
We're running out of time, you guys.
No,
We have like 3 minutes.
Just the one. And it went into the water.
No, it just gone off the radar.
Okay. No, I mean,
Then-
during his encounter, it went into the water, correct?
No. But what's also on this piece of film is he interviewed another guy who was a local cab driver who claimed to have seen a UFO land and this creature come up the side of the car. Only one problem. His friend was parked behind him. He said there was nothing there. He's lying. So he was a hoaxer. And I managed to find the hoax in a later newspaper. But we have the whole interview with him.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, well, we're pretty much out of time, unfortunately.
Can you come back on again, please? I'm mysterious. Oh,
Yeah.
good. All right. Because there's a lot to unpack. How long has this book been out?
Pascagoula Uncovered is only recently published. So, one of a handful of people I've spoken to about it at the moment. I'm still undergoing tests at the hospital, but I'll be okay. So I've got to take it easy.
Mm-hmm.
So But it's been a real pleasure speaking to you both this evening. I can't thank you enough. And don't forget the documentary. If you want to know a bit more, you can see the hypnosis on Pascagoula 73 as well. Both Maria and Calvin. We've used that. And that's seen there for the very first time.
Yeah, well, you've got quite a few books. I love that you're doing Flying Disc Press. But yeah, you've got quite a few books out there that people definitely need to check out.
And there's more to come.
A novel as well. Very, very cool.
Yeah.
But
that's the one that's coming out next year. I'm working on that now.
And they're all through through the
Flying Disc Press.
Okay. Perfect.
Very cool.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And they're all on Amazon. You know, that's Maria Blair.
Perfect. That's what I needed to know. Okay. Perfect.
Well, thanks very much. That was amazing. Yeah,
No, the thanks are all mine, Dolly and Preston. They really are. And you're doing a great job. And, you know, I just want to emphasize again to people, this is not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not.
It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of dedication and passion. So, you know, I hope your viewing and listening figures just increase, as I'm sure they will.
Thank you.
And thank you very much.
Thank you for your perseverance, because as somebody who is an experiencer, it took Preston a long time for me to unpack everything for him. Okay. Literally 6 years. And I'm still unpacking. I have a lifetime of this. And it takes somebody who wants to show the truth, wants to tell the truth as it comes from the experiencer, which you do. I'm very impressed with that. I'm impressed with Preston also for that reason. You just want to put out the truth, the data as you get it from the
experiencers have such a hard time.
From the horse, direct from the horse's mouth.
Yes. And it's glorious that you do that, because too many people go another direction, and it's always what somebody's best friend said yesterday, or a theory, or scientists say, or whatever, and it's never direct contact with the contactee or the situation itself. So I applaud you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, we have to go, Dolly. We got 1 minute.
Okay. All right. So stay on before we get off this channel, but I'm going to say good night, everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, good night. God bless.
Thank you. We're coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We are worldwide. That's why you're hearing us on radio somewhere in the world. We're also on Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, and Roku. Namaste, everybody. And thank you. And join us again. Night, night.